Hey everybody, welcome to the fantasygolfbag.com. Call this the EAP how-to video. This is long overdue, but I know a couple people in the last 2 weeks have asked for this. So I am going to be breaking down the EAP model. This is for the Memorial Tournament. Not so much how to use it for this particular week, but more so what is included in all the different stats, how I would use it in terms of like breaking down the stat categories between the 5T, 10T. And course history, or I guess full season and course history. But hopefully this will be evergreen. So I'm going to put this up on the website so you can go and find it. And if we ever have updates, new stats, etc., this will still pertain to it. You'll just obviously have new stats you can add weights to. So with that being said, let's dive right into it. All right. So as most of you are aware and very familiar with, the EAP data, also called the extended approach, you can download on the website. So you should have already gotten there, but for make this as inclusive as possible. The premium tools drop down under PGA tools. You can find the EAP model here. I also put a little link over here on the right-hand side. So if you click that, it should open up for you. And then the other premium tools are the Super Procs and the Showdown EAP, which we're not going to cover in this. We're just going to cover the EAP model. So if you go to the EAP model, I'll go ahead and just walk you through it. We'll go here. There's an opportunity to use it through the website. I don't recommend it. You can certainly do it. You can come in here and mess with your weights, whatever you want to do. But the easiest way to do it is either download it using this little arrow, says download, or even view full-size workbook. If you click this, it'll actually open up in a full window. So depending on your computer or laptop, PC, you can work it through your browser using that button there. So either way, if I'm on mobile and I'm doing like Showdown lineups, I will do that little button right there. It'll open up in my Safari because I have an iPhone, and then I can actually go through all the different stats for Showdown, and it's a lot easier to work with instead of having to like download it to Excel or numbers or whatever. So little trick there, download it, and then you can open it up like I am going to show you, or you can always just open it up in your browser. So you'll be presented with 4 different tabs now. You have the 5T extended approach, 10T. I'm down here at the bottom. 2022, because we're in 2022 right now, and then the mixed model and course history. So what each of these are the last tournaments, on the schedule. So the last 5 tournaments, the last 10 tournaments, the full 2022 season that has ShotLink data. And the mixed model is basically allowing you to go create your model rankings for each of those different tabs, and then create a cumulative ranking based on, for example, if you really like strokes gained approach, in every single model, but over the last 10 tournaments is really your sweet spot, and you can put more emphasis there. Maybe putting you think is a little bit hot and cold, and you say, I really want to see who's been putting well in the last 5 tournaments. You could put more emphasis on just 5T putting, and then that's included in your overall weights here. And then over here on the right is just a reference for course history. Again, we're looking at Memorial, and we can kind of see, obviously, Cantley with 2 wins here, and we can see everybody else's good finishes or bad finishes, multiple missed cuts, etc. So we'll talk about this here in just a second, but let's dive into the different tabs. We'll use the 10T for this example. Everything is the same on all the tabs. So all the same stats, spectrum data. We're up here at the top now. Spectrum data. I'll make this a little bit bigger. These are the categories of stats. So spectrum data is our own proprietary fantasy golf bag twist on strokes gained. So a little bit more predictive, takes out a lot of the outliers. There's an article on the website that walks through that. So that's the spectrum data. We have the scoring weighted data, par 3, par 4, par 5. Performance weighted data, birdie or better, bogey or worse, double or worse, 3-putt avoidance, etc. Proximity data, it's your normal proximity buckets. Tee to green weighted data. So it says tee to green, don't think strokes gained, but think driving distance, accuracy, greens and regulation. So like typical statistics. Opportunities. So this is pretty big for our Showdown, but we also include it in our EAP here. So like inside of 6 feet, 12 feet, 18 feet, this is all weighted to the field. You can see, Cameron Smith has been just crushing the field in opportunities inside of 18 feet, 12 feet. versus the field. And then one of my favorite stats that we have is positive strokes gain approach. And then you can look at just positive and negative approach numbers. So with that being said, the easiest way for you to kind of manipulate the model is to start in one of two places, and you could end up going to both places. First one is whenever Fantasy Golf Bag gets updated. So for example, if I go to my core article for this week, usually we have a first look and then you would find it here. But we have this little snapshot, and you can pertain most of the data that the golf course kind of provides from just this one simple graphic. So it has all the holes, breakdown of the yardages of the actual holes that they played, not the scorecard yardage. That's a big difference. Driving distance, average driving distance for the field, and then approach distances, the average approach distances for the field, and then a little summation at the top here. So you can get an idea of the approach buckets. You know, this golf course is pretty long in terms of guys hitting driver. Average driving distance on the par 4s and 5s at 310. But you can still see the approach numbers are 125 to 175. Majority are in that category. So it's not overly long in terms of approach numbers. We've seen longer approach numbers on shorter golf courses. So that's important. So we look at that. The other way to do it, Data Golf has a nice, easy tool. If you type in whatever tournament, so this one's the Memorial, type in the Memorial here, you can also get a lot of the same data. So they're using the scorecard yardage. They have their driving accuracy numbers. They actually have a fairway width. I don't do much with that, but it's pretty cool to see. Greens and regulation, driving accuracy, driving distance, etc. So with that being said, you can kind of get an idea of how a golf course played, or maybe how it's played over multiple years. We can see the approach buckets here. We can see, let's see, I'll do a strokes gain snapshot. Again, I've talked about this extensively for the last year or two. You know, the stats that are in a tournament that provide someone, you know, that was able to win doesn't necessarily mean that's the best form coming in that you want to target in the EAP model or any other model that you're building. So, but you can go through round by round. It's pretty cool, and see, you know, how did someone play? Maybe they really excel putting. So you can see here, Morikawa gained 1.5 strokes putting in round 1, lost over a stroke putting in round 2, gained over 1.5 strokes in round 3, and then gained 3.5 strokes almost in round 4. So you can just kind of see trends, maybe that were a low scoring event. Putting's a little bit more of a factor. Again, it doesn't really matter for lead in form, but you can definitely see trends on what shows up. Green regulation percentage, obviously that's one of my favorite stats, and we have it weighted to the field. But generally speaking, anybody that leads the field in green regulation, which is pretty predictive, to be honest, week to week, because there's a lot that goes into just a green regulation. There's driving, you know, people talk about off the tee, but like driving accuracy and driving distance improves your green regulation rate. So the higher your green regulation rate, generally speaking, the other stats leading into your green regulation rate are also doing well. So you can see here, obviously there's an odd miscut for Matt Wallace. I'm sure probably didn't putt very well. You can kind of see that there. If I do Wallace, half a stroke, he lost putting and lost 4 strokes putting there. So he missed the cut basically because he couldn't putt. But for the most part, I think it brings pretty good light in this scenario here. Green regulation rate for the event: Cantley number 1, Xander T11, Ortiz T16, Rahm should have won, so WD. Rosner 18th, 13th, 4th, 9th, 6th. Look, the green regulation is a great stat every single week. So with that being said, we kind of have an idea that, you know, driving looks pretty important. Driving accuracy at 70%. Greens and regulation rate only at 61%. So a little bit tougher to hit the greens here, which kind of adds to the emphasis on green regulation rate for me. So how would I go about this? So you see the total. We can, you know, if we manipulate any of our stats, so if I want to put 20% on strokes gain approach, or spectrum approach really, you can see here it's no longer at 100%. We're a little bit overweight. You can still use it, but you're just overweighting your full 100% allotment. So how I typically break it down, I've used spectrum data as kind of a long-term stable data source. So mostly every week, I'm going to be looking at the same stats in here. I never overemphasize approach. I do overemphasize in the sense that on the far right over here, we have positive strokes gained approach, which kind of double counts a little bit. Green and regulation kind of double counts. There's a lot of emphasis on approach, but in terms of spectrum or strokes gained, it's kind of interchangeable, but it's not. Off the tee is always important. You cannot use approach numbers without off the tee numbers. It's just you're digging yourself a hole. So I like to use tee to green instead of just like breaking out around the green or putting. Just adds a little bit of a balance. Off the tee approach are very important. So just typical ball striking stats. I don't put too much emphasis on scoring. If it's really a generic golf course and maybe like the approach numbers are everywhere from 75 yards to 225 yards, maybe I put a little extra on just par 4. Maybe if par 5s are the only thing are gettable, like TPC Sawgrass, maybe I'll do par 5s. But generally speaking, I don't touch it, but it's definitely something to look into. And again, this is weighted to the field. So it's not just playing, if you're playing the US Open and your average par 4 scoring is 4.1, but the average for the tournament for the field is like 4.7, you're really at like 3.6. So keep that in mind when you're using any of our data. It's always weighted to the field and course difficulty. This week in particular, birdie or better, I think is always has value. The best players generally are going to make more birdies. As you go down here, you can see very few are really beating the field in birdies. So never hurts to include birdie or better. Plus DK scoring emphasizes birdies. Bogey or worse this week, I think, is important. And then 3-putt avoidance, because these greens do look somewhat difficult. As you could see with Matt Wallace, lost 4 strokes putting last year in round 2. But again, kind of double counts bogey or worse with 3-putt avoidance. People can kind of get there in the same way. The same with scrambling. So for me, I'm going to use bogey or worse. I always use birdie or better. Double or worse, not used too often. Probably wouldn't be bad to mix it up on a difficult course like this. Maybe bogey or worse 5%, double or worse 5%. So you get a cumulative 10, but you also emphasize, like, I don't want guys making doubles. So you can kind of balance this out as much as you want, or overemphasize anything you want as much as you'd like. We saw the approach numbers. So 150 to 200 yards. I think it was actually 125 to 175. So I'll do this. And then I'll bring in this kind of lower bucket under 150. So that's, again, I don't put a ton of weight in this. I don't want to rely too much on recent results, I guess, from strokes gained in certain buckets. Our sample size is good enough, but again, you're sometimes just splitting hairs between, was this 0.13 for Rory McIlroy, like one extra shot that he hit really well, versus Jon Rahm in that category. Maybe Rory just had a category or had a round where he had an extra opportunity here and hit a good shot in softer conditions. So I do like doing that, but it's something to keep in mind. Don't overemphasize proximity so much. The strokes gained approach that we have at the end, which I'll show you, is probably the one thing I would overemphasize. Going into this week, I don't think driving distance matters so much. I mean, it's important, but we kind of incorporate that with the off the tee numbers. I do think driving accuracy, an extra bump there, helps. And then, like I said, greens and regulation incorporates a lot. Like, I could just run a model just straight off of greens and regulation 100%, and I would feel pretty confident in the players that are going to pop up and build a lineup. So greens and regulation is always going to be probably the highest single stat that I use. Again, approach numbers, cumulative approach numbers across spectrum approach, positive strokes gain approach, etc., will be high. But greens and regulation as a single stat will always be the highest I have. And then I did use scrambling. It did seem like it's a pretty difficult scrambling course. So if greens and regulation aren't great and scrambling isn't great, they're not going to be showing up in my model, which is important. It's just a matter of like targeting the best plays, is avoiding some of like the mediocre plays and just avoiding them altogether. And then lastly, in this section here for opportunities. So this is opportunities inside of 6 feet, 12 feet, 18 feet, 24 feet, very similar to our showdown data. I don't use it so much for EAP, but I know guys tinker with it, and it's certainly fine. I mean, you can honestly take out the proximity data here and throw it into inside of 18 feet or 24 feet. So it's kind of like a green and regulation statistic in a sense, but you're really emphasizing a certain distance, not just a green and regulation. And again, our GIR number is weighted to the field, so it's not like these guys are hitting, the green and regulation at Pebble Beach is not weighed the same as Erin Hills because they're drastically different size greens. It's always weighted to the field. And then the stroke gain approach splits. I love positive stroke gain approach, again, similar to our spectrum data and how it's kind of incorporated. If a player has 18 approach shots in a round of golf and, they hit a couple bad ones and a couple good ones, and they dump one in the water and lose a stroke and a half, I'm really more concerned with how many actual approach shots did they gain on the field. I'm not so concerned with their total, because their total can be skewed both positively and negatively. If someone made a hole in one, it's going to be skewed positively. That's where the spectrum data comes in. So in theory, there could be a player that gained on 75% of their approaches. It's a pretty high number, but let's just use that for argument's sake. Another player gained on only 25% of their approaches, but had a higher strokes gain number than the player that gained on 75% of their approaches, just because of a single shot, positive or negative, for each of those players. So I love looking at the consistency of positive strokes gain approach. And then this is here for reference. You could use it. I'm not sure how many people do, but like maybe a consistency factor of strokes gained approach lost. You can weigh that. You can see like who's really not hitting terrible golf shots with their irons. So once you do all that, you can apply it. I can copy and paste my model percentages to each of these different 5T and the full season. And then when I get done, instead of me going through it, and I do go through one by one, tab by tab, and kind of look at guys that pop specifically, but it's a really nice summary to show up here and see, okay, I weighed X, Y, and Z for each of those different time frames. And now I can see who's actually grading out the best. Xander Schauffele looks great. 10T is great. He's great over 5 tournaments. He's great over the season. He is the top ranked guy in my model for this week. But you can see even trends like Patrick Cantlay. This only has one event from the PGA. So you would keep that in mind. But you can see guys that maybe are trending down or up depending on how you weight it. So keep that in mind. It's a great way, a nice, easy snapshot for you to look at each of these over different time periods and see a cumulative. We include projected ownership here. So it kind of gives you a nice, easy way to maybe see like, oh, these guys grade out the same, but they're very different in ownership. You can make a decision there. And then lastly, the course history. So hopefully this helps. We'll try to do a few more of these tutorial videos as each of these tournaments kind of surpasses us. And hopefully this does help. And with that, best of luck this week and for the rest of the season. If you have any questions, shoot them over in the Discord or on Twitter @RedKachik. Good luck and see ya.